Good afternoon, Mr. Sudi.
Good afternoon, Your Honor.
Nakula lunch?
Nakula lunch. Naliko sawa.
Sawa. I have a ruling here which, because I know there is immense public interest in this matter, so it's important for the public to know the reasoning of the court. But I'm going to skip the quotations. I will just read the parts that pertain to the reasoning of the court. Is that okay?
That's okay.
Okay. So I'll begin now. Sudi Oscar Kipchumba, the applicant hereafter, is a Kenyan citizen. He presented himself to the police on the 13th of September 2020 after learning that the police were looking for him and after the police had camped outside his house the previous few hours. The applicant's home is in Kapseret, where the applicant also happens to be the area member of parliament. Upon his surrender at Langas police station in Western Gishu County, the applicant was brought to Nakuru Central Police Station. The following day, he was presented before the Chief Magistrate, the learned J.B. Carlo, in a miscellaneous application. The Republic, through the NCIC, sought leave of the court to detain the applicant for 14 days, give it an opportunity to conclude investigations and bring charges against him. In its application in the lower court, the Republic stated that it is doing investigations with a view to bringing 5 charges against the applicant as follows: hate speech, assault of a police officer, offensive conduct, unlawful possession of firearms and ammunition, and resisting arrest contrary to Section 103 of the National Police Service Act. The learned magistrate had both parties and reserved a ruling for the 16th of September 2020. In his considered ruling, the learned magistrate held that the Republic had made out a case for the continued detention of the applicant for a further period of 7 days. Applicant believes that the decision by the learned magistrate is patently erroneous and amenable to revision or review by this court pursuant to the provisions of Article 165 of the Constitution, Sections 123, 362, and 364 of the Criminal Procedure Code. He has therefore filed the instant application dated 17th of September 2020, basically seeking orders of reversal of the lower court ruling. The matter was placed before me under certificate of urgency yesterday, that is the 17th of September. Owing to the nature of the subject matter and its urgency, I directed the applicant's lawyers to serve the DPP and return today for the parties' hearing. In doing so, I considered it critical to hear from the state before making any substantive or consequential decision on the matter. As directed, the parties appeared before me today for oral conversing of the application. I've carefully considered the oral representations of the parties' advocates, the constitutional and statutory authorities cited, as well as the decisional law quoted. I have also considered the scheduled submissions filed by the applicant's lawyers. I'm grateful to all the counsel who addressed the court, Mr. Nelson Harvey, Mr. Nathan Tororoi, and Mr. Hilary Sige, on behalf of the applicant, and Mr. Daniel Karuri for the DPP. Each one of them was resplendent in their blend of erudition and brevity. I should begin by dealing with a potentially dispositive procedural matter raised by Mr. Karuri for the DPP. That is, that it was a mistake for the applicant to have approached by way of revision as opposed to preferring an appeal. He argued that the applicant is not really advancing arguments about the regularity or illegality of the proceedings, but is dissatisfied with the decision of the learned magistrate. They, therefore, ought to have appealed against it. Mr. Harvey's response was that a revision was the appropriate step since no charge had been preferred against the applicant yet, and in any event, the Supreme Court has recently declared in the Joseph Landrix Waswa case that interlocutory appeals in criminal matters ought to be referred until the final termination of the criminal trial. This is a path not open to the applicant given the nature of the application, Mr. Harvey argued. In R versus Mark Lloyd Stevenson, I dealt with a variant of this question and held as follows. In my view, the CPC provisions do not, however, mean that a party which has the right of appeal cannot thereby invoke the court's power to review a magistrate's court's order or decision. For clarification, it is important to state the right position that the High Court will usually exercise the power to review, to even exercise an appeal of an interlocutory matter before magistrate's court only in exceptional circumstances. While difficult to determine with mathematical precision when the court will use this power, it is only sparingly used where, in the words of South African authors Gardner and Lansdowne, grave injustice might otherwise result, or where justice might not by other means be attained. As the authors correctly write, the court will generally hesitate to intervene, especially having regard to the effect of such a procedure upon the continuity of proceedings in the court below. Hence, the propriety of exercising revision power for interlocutory matters is decided on the facts of each case and with due regard to the salutary general rule that appeals are not interpreted this way. In the present case, the applicant's counsel, as the applicant's counsel noted, there is no criminal trial yet. What is before the subordinate court are miscellaneous proceedings where a ruling has been made to the applicant in the charge detention. Both the terms of the Criminal Procedure Code, as well as the radically liberalized discretionary powers the High Court donated in Article 265 of the Constitution, clearly permit the applicant to approach this court for revision as he did. I will now turn to the substantive issue at hand. The singular question presented by this application is whether, in balancing the rights of the applicant, the interests of justice and public order, peace and security, in the circumstances of this case, there are compelling reasons to warrant the continued pre-charge detention of the applicant, as the subordinate court held. In reaching the conclusion that such pre-charge detention is warranted, the learned magistrate reasoned as follows. It was submitted on the 14th from the learned magistrate. It was submitted on behalf of the applicant, that is the state, that the respondent made certain utterances that the applicant says amount to hate speech which trigger demonstrations against the respondent, and its release from custody at this particular moment will disturb public order and security. The court is invited to balance between public interest and the right of the respondent to be released on bond. In the peculiar circumstances of this case, the court finds the public interest override the respondent's right to be released on bond at this stage. End of quote. A second reason the lower court gives for the continued pre-charge detention of the applicant is that the applicant is likely to interfere with potential witnesses. The learned magistrate reasons that, I quote, the respondent applicant, that is the applicant here, is a member of parliament for Kapseret constituency. It is clear from the commotion that occurred at the respondent's home on the night of Friday 12 September, when the police attempted to arrest him, that the respondent is a person of immense influence, and the likelihood of him interfering with witnesses is real. As was held in the case of Sebastian Miriti, if the accused can influence witnesses, be it subtly or even through threats, it is a fact to be considered. The respondent is likely to influence potential witnesses. End of quote. The applicant insists that the court fundamentally misapprehended both law and the facts in its analysis and findings. In particular, in both the documents he has filed before this court, as well as in the oral arguments of his advocates before me, the applicant makes the following 4 points. First, that the finding of the Honorable Court that it was in the public interest to detain the applicant was an erroneous interpretation of the public interest matrix and inconsistent with the settled principles, and thereby negates the fundamental rights, freedoms, and liberties as set forth in Article 29 of the Constitution. The applicant argues that the court's decision was not proportionate in balancing the rights and liberties of the applicant against alleged public interest. The applicant argues that our jurisprudence has now established that when individual liberties come into conflict with national security, it is the latter which must give way, not the other way around. Second, the applicant argues that the court breached the fair trial rights of the applicant by stating merely on the basis of the state affidavit that the applicant's utterances amount to hate speech. Third, the applicant argues that it was an error for the court to have held that the applicant can be held in detention, notwithstanding that there was no holding charge preferred against him. The applicant argues that the police have no authority in law to arrest and detain any person without sufficient grounds and without informing of the reasons of his arrest, as required under Article 49(1)(a) of the Constitution. Fourth, the applicant argues that it was an error for the court to conclude that the applicant would interfere with unknown and undisclosed witnesses merely by the fact that the applicant is a member of parliament for Red constituency and therefore influential. The applicant argues, placing reliance on William Kipchirchir case as well as the Dwight Sagare case, that for the prosecution to succeed in persuading the court of this criteria of interference, it must place material before the court which demonstrates actual or perceived interference, and that just suspicions and fears covered by the prosecution are not enough. The state, on the other hand, supported the learned magistrate's findings and conclusions, insisting that it had persuaded the court on the basis of the materials it placed before it that it was in the interest of public security and order that the state is allowed to complete investigations before Mr. Sudi is released. Mr. Karuri argued that the state complied with Article 49(1)(g) and (h) of the Constitution because the state informed the applicant the reasons of his complete detention, which was that his immense influence in Kapseret would undermine efforts to record statements from potential witnesses. Mr. Karuri argued that the state was still conducting investigations and that it was incumbent upon the court to protect the integrity of the criminal justice system by ordering the continued detention of the applicant until the investigations are complete, since there is credible fear that he will undermine those investigations. Mr. Karuri submitted that the interests of justice demand the protection of the investigation process against probable hindrance by would-be accused persons. On the question why the state has not preferred a holding charge, Mr. Karuri argued that such a position would be untenable because such a charge would not be accurate in its particulars, hence undermining the foundational principle of certainty of charges as provided in Article 124 of the Criminal Procedure Code. Mr. Karuri, however, submitted that should the court be persuaded to grant bail, then it should bind the applicant, as he has already pledged in his affidavit, supporting affidavit, to keep the peace and not to make comments which might incite the public. It is probably rhetorically symmetrical, linguistically aesthetic, as well as structurally sound, for reasons which will emerge shortly. To begin with the applicant's most strident argument. That argument is that the judicial imprimatur given to the action of the police and the NCIC to hold the applicant in continued detention in the absence of a formal charge or holding charge is per se unconstitutional. The argument is that holding an arrested person beyond the 24-hour period prescribed in Article 49(1)(f) of the Constitution without charging them with an offense not to law is categorically violative of the Constitution. My senior brother Kimaru J, in Michael Rotich v. Republic case, was of the opinion that a correct reading of Articles 29 and 49 of the Constitution yields the result proposed by the applicant. I've quoted at length what Justice Kimaru says in the Rotich case. Article 49(1)(f) of the Constitution provides as follows. An An arrested person has the right to be brought before a court as soon as reasonably possible, but no later than 1, 24 hours after being arrested, and then G, at the first court appearance, to be charged or informed of the reason for the detention continuing or to be released, and H, to be released on bond or bail on reasonable conditions pending a charge or trial unless there are compelling reasons not to be released. The court, in the Michael Rotich case I just cited, while decrying the ubiquitous use of pre-charge detention, ruled that the constitutional meaning of to be informed of the reason for the detention continuing, which is the constitutional word used, can only be met with the presentation of a holding charge at the very minimum. There are good reasons for this purposeful reading of the Constitution. Why should the police arrest a citizen if they do not even have a provisional view of the offense the citizen has committed? It would seem repugnant to the ethos of the constitutional justification of the exercise of power and authority in which our Constitution is steeped in, to encourage such practice, even if not categorically and constitutionally textually. In many cases, such police action would be, in context and effect, unconstitutional. This would be the case where the police conduct, for example, reveals a pattern or desire to overreach or to deploy the criminal justice system in a manner which unnecessarily diminishes rather than aggrandizes personal liberty or autonomy of the arrested individual. So, even while accepting that the text of Article 49(1)(f) may, in certain circumstances and contexts, comprehend a situation where a person is presented before a court without being formally charged and is thereby informed of the reasons for his continued detention through the state's application to have him so held, the state must, in my view, satisfy a double test. First, the state must persuade the court that it is acting in absolute good faith and that the continued detention of the individual without a charge being preferred, whether provisional or otherwise, is inevitable due to existing exceptional circumstances. Second, the state must demonstrate that the continued detention of the individual without charge is the least restrictive action it can take in balancing the quadruple interest present in a potential criminal trial. That is, the rights of the arrested individual, the public interest, order, and security, the needs to preserve the integrity of the administration of justice, and lastly, the interest of the victims of crime where appropriate. By virtue of Articles 21(1) and 259 of the Constitution, the court must act to aggrandize and not diminish the personal liberties of arrested individuals in line with the other three interests. Differently put, the state must demonstrate that there are compelling reasons to deny pre-charge bail while balancing all factors within a complex permutation presented by this quadruple interest and without reifying or essentializing any. This framing of the test combines the four arguments the applicant made into a single multi-pronged weighted test. I will now apply it to the facts of the case. Can it be said that the state here is acting in absolute good faith and that the continued detention of the applicant without a charge being preferred, whether provisional or otherwise, is inevitable due to existing exceptional circumstances? The state's preferred reasons for the continued detention, which were accepted by the learned magistrate, were two. First, that the applicant exercises great influence on members of the public by virtue of his being a member of parliament, and that, therefore, releasing him created a foreseeable risk that he will interfere with the investigation. Second, that given the charge he faces and given that there have been demonstrations against the applicant, his release from custody will disturb public order, peace, and security. Do these two reasons meet the high threshold in the double test I have synthesized above? I think they do not. I say so for at least three reasons. First, the argument that the applicant is likely to interfere with witnesses because he is a man of immense persuasion and influence seems eminently pretextual for at least two reasons. One, looking at the the offenses that the state says it hopes to charge the applicant with, it appears to be a stretch on credibility to posit that any witness would be unduly influenced by the evidence. One, the critical elements of hate speech are provable not through individual witnesses who might come under the influence of the applicant, but by showing the ordinary import of the words uttered by the applicant were calculated to incite members of the public. Two, assault on a police officer would be proved not by a member of the public who may be susceptible to wither under the influence of his MP during investigations, but by the police officer who was allegedly assaulted. Yes. Three, unlawful possession of firearms and ammunition is proved, as the learned magistrate ruling correctly held, through forensic, documentary, and expert evidence. Four, resisting arrest is also provable through the factual evidence of police officers who were present at the time of the attempted arrest. And five, it is unclear what the offense of committing offensive conduct would entail in the circumstances here, but such generality and nebulousness of the allegations cannot be a ground for limiting constitutional rights of an accused person. Two, the state made no efforts whatsoever to demonstrate which witnesses would be interfered with and how such interference would happen at the investigation stage given the offenses contemplated. It is not enough to proclaim that an arrested person wields influence in his line of business, profession, trade, or occupation. In order to restrict the person's right to be released on pre-charge bail, the state must credibly and specifically demonstrate the likelihood of such interference. Second, the argument that the interests of public order, peace, and security necessitate the pre-charge detention of the applicant because his speech has led to quote-unquote demonstrations against him does not meet, in my view, the high threshold of compelling test required by our Constitution. The reason given appears illogical when set against the granted remedy. The applicant without charging him for 7 days, then releasing him. There is no indication how holding the applicant for precisely 7 more days will dissipate the public order, peace, and security risk his alleged utterance caused. I have noted that there is no allegation that the applicant has threatened to make like utterances if they are indeed capable of inciting the public. In any event, the applicant has demonstrated a willingness to abide by the condition not to make any comment akin to the ones the state finds insalubrious and capable of inciting the public. What then is the logic of his continued detention? In short, the radical remedy prayed for and granted to the state, which is to hold the applicant without charge for 7 more days, is not rationally related to the alleged risk. Yes. There is a second reason to worry about the contextual and simplistic pitting of public order, peace, and security on the one hand, against the personal liberty, interest, and autonomy of the applicant on the other. It is that the logic espoused by this simplistic pitting is a dangerous anti-liberty ethos, yes, which was rejected by the Constitution of Kenya 2010. Yes. Yes. I clearly expressed this reasoning in Joseph Thiongo in 17 Others versus Republic, and it is sufficient to reproduce here at length the relevant paragraphs. And I quote from that case. The defense would be correct to argue, this was a similar case that was in Kiambu, and this is what I said in that case. The defense would be correct to argue that such a blunt response to the breakdown in law and order would be tantamount to sacrificing the rights of the accused person in order to secure peace and security for the rest of society. Needless to say, our Constitution no longer countenances such an approach. Such was the approach to law and order that justified the authoring into our law books the infamous Public Order and Security Act. The logic that it is necessary to simply detain some quote-unquote dangerous citizens in order to maintain law and order for the rest of the society. That logic has been substituted in our constitution with the opposite logic, that every accused person is presumed innocent and is entitled to bail and not to remain in remand unless compelling reasons are shown. The authority of the court to deny bail where compelling reasons are shown can now not be invoked as a reason for the security apparatuses and the state to refuse to undertake their foremost duty to protect all citizens and maintain law and order in the society. Where the alleged sources of threat are known and the potential victims of the illicit activities are known, it will be to reduce the state's monopoly of violence and duty to protect its citizens to a sacrilegious impotence to conclude that only the remanding of particular accused persons or suspects who are not themselves alleged sources of threats is the method to protect the potential victims and public order. Having reached here in my analysis, the result appears eminently tautological. The application herein largely succeeds. There are no compelling reasons for the continued pre-charge detention of the applicant.
Yes.
All the concerns raised by the state can be accommodated without the very radical measures sought and granted to the state to hold the applicant pre-charge for 11 days in the circumstances of this case. I must return to the words I stated in the Joseph Thiomo case that I cited before. And they are, I'm obliged to observe that the pathway to peace and justice chosen by our Constitution is one that assumes that aggrandizing personal autonomy and liberties, especially in the context of a criminal trial, is one that ensures our optimum aggregate collective peace, security, and justice more than the alternative path that limits individual liberties in order to safeguard these important values and outcomes. Ours is a constitution that wisely assumes that peace, security, and justice can be achieved in the context of the rule of law. For this to happen, each of the actors in the governance, law, order, and security sector must play the rightful role in ensuring sustainable peace, prosperity, and security. The disposition of the application then is as follows. A, the applicant, Sudi Oscar Kipchumba, shall be admitted to bail in the sum of Kenyan shillings 500,000 with respect to all the charges the state contemplates to bring against him as covered by the state's application before the lower court. Alternatively, the applicant shall be released on his own personal recognizance of Kenyan shillings 1 million and one surety of similar sum. These bail bond terms shall remain in effect and shall only expire upon the formal charging of the applicant with a disclosed offense or offenses. Upon such eventuality, the trial court shall be at liberty to set its own bail bond terms. B, the applicant shall not, and I hope Mr. Sudi is listening here carefully.
I'm so careful, Your Honor.
Mr. Sudi, are you listening here carefully?
I'm listening very carefully.
This is to you, not to your attorneys, okay? So, the applicant shall before a charging decision is made in this case, and thereafter, until the order is varied by the trial court, make any public utterances or comments akin to those he is alleged to have made, which the state alleges are capable of inflaming public passions and hostilities among communities. C, the applicant shall desist from addressing any public rally before investigations into this case are complete and a charging decision made. I've only limited it to until a charging decision is made. After that, you can address public rallies. Okay? D, the applicant shall report to any police station as summoned by the investigating officer for purposes of completing investigations. E, the state shall be at liberty to charge the applicant with any disclosed offenses once investigations are complete and charging decisions made. Meanwhile, F, the applicant shall, this is for you, Mr. Karuri, the applicant shall not be arrested or detained by the police. If a decision to charge him is made, he shall be summoned to present himself to court.
Yes, yes.
Lastly, each party will be at liberty to apply for any further orders. I think you are still muted, Mr. President.
So, my Lord, on behalf of the applicant, we thank you most sincerely
Yes.
for giving us an opportunity to develop the law and to assert the authority of the sovereign of the people of Kenya. We are forever grateful. Be blessed and have a good weekend. We will take Mr. Suni all the way to Kapsaret in confinement so that he doesn't speak about the truth. Thank you so much, Daniel Karuri.
It appears you might need, you probably might need the duct tape to keep him out of trouble. According to what Mr. Karuri believes.
Lord, your mask came to design a leather mask.
Mr. Karuri, you have anything to say?
Much obliged, my Lord, for your wise ruling. We are very grateful. We are developing the law. And just to remind the applicant that it is required on the 23rd of this month before the magistrate's court.
Before the CM.
Yes, my Lord. We are much obliged, and to the President and my fellow colleagues, thank you so much.
Asanteni sana, the ruling will be available with my court assistant in the next 5 minutes, so it will be sent to the email to you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Okay?
Thank you. Iko. Finished. Finished. Iko.
Kita garita que te llegue.
Hapo pano talking iko shida. Hiyo iko shida.
That's where the problem is.
Hapo pano talking.
Sasa no talking wameharibu. Wamevuruga yeye.
Madame, fungua mlango.
Congrats, Moishi. Por ahí es.